Welcome to my Psychic Manifesto. I'm your host, Ian Pekrul, and today we'll be discussing Seth's research project. I'd like to introduce Deb Tejada. She's a researcher at Seth's research project. And Deb, welcome to my Psychic Manifesto. Thank you for agreeing to do the interview.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Deb, how did you hear about the Seth Material?
I came to the Seth Material many years ago through Abraham Hicks. I had a friend that turned me on to Abraham Hicks, and it was a new concept for me. You make your own reality type of law of attraction stuff. And I liked it, but I just felt like there's more, there should be more. There was something missing. And in one of their books, Jerry wrote about the first time he ever put his hands on a Seth book. He was in a bookstore somewhere, and it practically like fell on into his hands. And he just kept going on about how amazing this book was. And that got my curiosity up. And so it's like, I want to know who this Seth is. And so I went out and I think I got the Seth Material first. And I just absorbed the whole thing. It was just like amazing. It was like, that was it. That's what I was looking for. And now I've got all the books.
Right. How did you, could you tell us a little bit about Mary Dillman and the Seth Research Project? How did you meet Mary and hear about the Seth Research Project?
Well, Mary, now just going back to Mary, she was working as a tax appraiser. And then and she was a big Seth fan, and she decided, I think she said she was she was really into the Seth Material, and just had this whim one day to quit her job and move to New Haven because she had heard about the Yale Library archives. So that's how she got there. That was in 1998. And then just several years ago, I had bought Richie's book, The Road to Elmira, and I have a thing about getting autographed books or signed books. And so what I did was I emailed him, because his email address is always in his books. And I said, hey, I loved your book. Is there any way you could sign one for me? And he said, absolutely. And so he signed one and sent it to me. And I said, by the way, I'm a graphic designer. And if you ever want to write another book or anything like that, let me know. I'd love to help you with it. And so he did end up contacting me to do some Photoshop photographs for him. And then about a year later, he decided to write his creative journey. A creative journey, Seth inspired. And he asked me if I would help him with that. And so that's kind of how I got to know Mary, because they were very good friends. They both lived in New Haven, and Rich would help Mary with her project. And so then after I did that book for him, and they saw that it turned out really nicely and professionally, Mary found, as she was going through archives, she found a book that Jane had made for their neighbor, Leonard. Yalds, I think his name, Yods. I don't know how it's pronounced. He was having triple bypass surgery and was in the hospital. And she wanted to do something to cheer him up. And so she put together a collection of small paintings and poetry, all, done by hand. And she scotch taped them onto pages of a little sketchbook. And so Mary said to Rich, well, you think Deb would help us getting this printed? And I was just thrilled. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm get to do some more Seth stuff. I'm going to get involved with this. And so she actually put Richie in charge of being in contact with me. I don't know if she just kind of delegated it to him. I had the impression she didn't really want any contact with me. But then after a while, I did end up having contact with her because they were having trouble getting good photographs of the pages. So she ended up just FedExing the book to me herself. And so I just remember the day that it arrived, and I pulled it out of the FedEx envelope. And it was like I couldn't believe I was actually holding something in my hands that Jane had done herself. It was like, oh my gosh. I could almost see Jane when I was holding it. And so I did get good photographs taken of it, and I did get the book printed. I had to order special paper because we wanted it to look exactly like the original so that people could pick it up and feel it and know this is what the original feels like and looks like. And it really turned out great.
Now you're talking about A Little Book to Leonard?
Yeah. That was the book she made for her neighbor, Leonard, who was in the hospital. So it's Jane's Little Book to Leonard. I had to buy paper from out of state, but I had a local printer do it. And we spiral bound the top just so that it looks exactly like the original. And
this is a series, were those watercolors or pastel drawings that Jane had, they were drawings that Jane had done to, like, for Leonard was one of her neighbors, correct? Who's in the hospital at the time. She did that to sort of cheer him up. It was her poetry and some pretty simple sketches.
And they were watercolors. And
can you hold one of them up just for a minute?
Well, sure. Yeah. So I don't know if you want me to, I don't know how to translate. Cool. But I wanted to even have the impression of the Scotch tape show, because the Scotch tape had yellowed and it was kind of peeling up in some places. And so I left all of that in there. And in the process, well, when the first day I got the book, I was looking through the paintings in there and just like, oh my gosh, Jane painted that. Oh my gosh. And I saw what looked like lines showing through from the back side of one of the paintings. It looked like dark, like Sharpie or something. It wasn't bleeding through. It just looked like it was there, something there. And so I called Mary up and I said, Mary, I found, it looks like there's a sketch on the back of one of these paintings. And they're all watercolor. And Jane did the poems. I'm trying to think now. It was watercolor pencils. And so she wrote them out in different colors, and then she took a little bit of water and smudged the pictures. And I didn't want to break the tape on the one that I thought there was a sketch on the back. And Mary said, no, I'll just go ahead and do it. And so I just cut, I left one side intact so I could just peel. And sure enough, there was a sketch on the back there. And I suppose I could show it. I almost had the impression that it was a sketch of like a self-portrait almost of Jane.
Yeah, it does look like a she did a self-portrait of herself. Interesting. That was taped over on the last page.
Yeah, I don't even think Leonard knew it was there. So I thought that gave me goosebumps when I found that. It's like, whoa, I found something special,
So did Mary start? So again, let's back up a little bit. So there is a lot of there's a collection of literature. There's a collection called the Jane Roberts Papers at Yale University, right? Is that correct? Could you tell me? But now Mary Dillman didn't. Who started that? Whose idea was it to? Was that Robert Butts?
Rob and Jane, and I just pulled that up the other day. In Dreams, Evolution, and Value Fulfillment, Volume 1, session number 887, Rob writes about Jane and Rob made their wills. And they decided they wanted all of their materials, both of them, to go to the Yale archives. And I think Tam Mossman was the one who suggested or gave them the idea to do that.
That was Jane's publisher. That was Jane's agent at Tam Hall. Is that correct?
At Prentice Hall.
Prentice Hall.
It was Tam Mossman. And Tam really isn't his first name. I don't know how many people know that. But those are his initials. I think his name, I don't know if his name was Thomas or who was, but his first name began with a T, his middle name began with an A, and his last name was Mossman with an M. And so they called him Tam.
No, I had no idea. Cool.
Yeah, that wasn't, so I think he gave them an idea, and he also had a contact at the library. And so he connected them up with the archives. And so they said they were willing to accept the papers. And so
now, as far as I know, that's the only collection of metaphysical literature that Yale houses, as far as I know.
I've heard that. I haven't actually looked at the other collections they have there. But I have heard that. I can't say for sure.
Okay. Not. All right. So that was Jane and Rob that wanted the collection of, and what does the Jane Roberts Papers entail? What's there?
A lot of, all right, it's mostly photocopies of things from Jane and Rob, whether it's letters, emails, books, sessions, probably magazine articles. There is so much out there that people don't know about Jane and Rob's, like magazines would do stories on them. They had interviews done on them. And so Laurel Davies, who's Rob's second wife, has all the originals. She's storing them in her home. And so Rob and Laurel and another person were putting together copies and making submissions to Yale. And I've actually got the page up right now. They started, I think he started in 1994. And so if you go to the archives.yale.edu and look for Jane Roberts papers, just Google Jane Roberts papers, Yale, and the link will come up right away. And they have a list of all the accessions, what years, how many boxes there are, what the boxes numbers are. And then you can search, they have a search engine, you can search what's in the boxes. Now, Mary's research project, the Seth research project that she started when she moved to New Haven, she wanted to go through the boxes and write down the details about every single thing that was in there, every single page. Because Rob had done that in a way, but it wasn't as thorough. She didn't think it was thorough enough.
You're talking about Robert Butts, Jane's husband. Just
right.
for our viewers, I assume most people watching know a little bit of something about the Seth Material. Sorry,
yeah, Robert Butts, her husband, and so he had done that, but it was not as thorough as she wanted, because she felt researchers that would go there would not be able to find some important things, and so she made it her value fulfillment lifetime project. She was there, I worked on it for 23 years, and put all these in Excel databases and spreadsheets, but it's even more than that. I mean, she didn't just index all of the boxes, and I have to say, the Excel document, if I were to print it, would be 700 pages long, and that's legal size paper, and that's reducing it to fit on the page. I can't imagine how she was able to accomplish what she did, even in 23 years. I mean, it's just a massive amount of information. She cross-referenced everything. She has all different types of Excel things, such as the Jane's life chronology, even its dates, and going back to even the birth of the grandparents' birth dates, and when Jane was born, and when she was in school, and when she, I mean, it was just very detailed. I have a 14-page document that I put up on the research project website where people can download it, and I'm still updating it. But also, as part of her research project, she wanted to talk to people that knew Jane and Rob. And I'm glad she started when she did, because a lot of those people aren't around with us anymore. She did telephone or in-person interviews and recorded them and asked them about, what was your experience? Were you, and she has another database that shows, well, this person was a ESP class member, or this person worked with Rob. He was an illustrator at Artistic Greetings. And so there were some people that she interviewed because they ended up coming to sessions and being friends. Neighbors from when Jane was a little girl. Neighbors in other houses that they lived in, I don't think she interviewed Harold. He might have passed by the time she got around to doing this. But she has 47 interviews that she transcribed. And I feel like I should backtrack, but I guess I can't.
Yeah, that's okay. For those of our viewers, Mary passed away. Was it earlier this year? Was it March? When did Mary pass away?
It was December 10th.
December 10th. So a little over a year ago, Mary passed away, and Deb has taken up, as researcher, Deb is carrying on Mary's project. So Mary interviewed 48 people. And now, are you in the process of transcribing these interviews?
This is one of the things she asked me to do before she passed away. And I'll explain how that came about in a bit, but she asked me if I would listen. She had some hearing issues for a while. And so she had trouble transcribing things, like I helped her with the Village Voice transcriptions as well. So she asked me to go through all of her transcripts and compare them to the audio and make any corrections that were necessary before that all goes to Yale. They're not accepting anything until July because they were shut down this whole time with COVID, and they're very far behind, which is good because it gives me extra time to get these together. So yeah, all these interviews of people, and they are just so fascinating to listen to. All the people that knew Jane and Rob in different ways, and these little anecdotal stories, the things that are not in the books that no one knows about. And so that's something, once I get those all done, I intend to put those up on the Seth Research Project website, the transcripts at least, so people can download them if they want and read them. Like, I just finished the Sue Watkins one a couple of days ago.
Sue Watkins was one of Jane Roberts' students at the ESP classes in Elmira, and Sue also read. Sue Watkins also wrote 2 books. I think it was 1 book in 2 parts, Conversations with Seth. So Mary interviewed Sue Watkins, and you just finished transcribing that one, or?
Yeah, and Sue wrote the book about Jane Roberts too. Speaking of Jane,
Okay.
And she also had a couple of books of her own. I Dream of Town. It's behind me right now. What a Coincidence. And it's all Seth based, all of her books that they have to do with Jane and Seth. So yeah, the Sue Watkins one, she's a crack up, very funny, exuberant person. And it was just great listening to the 2 of them kind of going back and forth.
And Sue Watkins also passed away, like within the last, when did Sue Watkins pass away?
I don't know. It might be longer. 1.5 or 2 years now.
Okay. Yeah, not too long ago. Yeah, Richard Kendall also transitioned recently. So right, it's good that Deb did start her project when she did, because a lot of these people aren't with us, are no longer with us. But yeah, that's awesome that you've taken up this mantle. And Deb has done a lot of this on her own time as a volunteer, and actually spent money out of her own pocket. Paying a third party. I believe you paid somebody to do some of these transcriptions. Is that correct?
No, actually Mary did.
Mary did. Okay.
Yeah, but when I took over this project, I had all of her stuff was up on OneDrive. And so I wanted to get all of that stuff down from OneDrive. I didn't intend on actually continuing the subscription to OneDrive. But then when I realized how much information there was, I ended up deciding to renew it. So I'm going to keep that. She had a Dropbox that was out of date, but I didn't want to continue paying for that because everything was on OneDrive. Plus, I had taken a long time, weeks, to download everything to my computer and then back it up on 3 separate external drives, which I had to buy. I've had to pay, web hosting, domain name, because I maintain her website. Actually, I maintained her website before she passed, because after I did the little book for Leonard, we got to know each other pretty well. And she would ask me to help her do edits to her website. I put the shopping cart in there for her. So I redid her website after she passed away, because she had it on Squarespace and I wanted something a little cleaner looking, So I purchased her, I renewed her domain name, have hosting to pay. But I don't have a whole lot of expenses. Mary, I think, really did the brunt of that with paying people to transcribe old cassettes. She had Richie's cassettes from when he was recording sessions.
Richard Kendall, who is also one of the New York boys, a student of Jane Roberts, like Rick Stacks and Barry Gellis, who was a guest on the show. Sue Watkins were some of the who's who of Seth students. We have Lawrence out here, who was put on the California Seth conferences, was also one of the New York boys. And Mary Dillman presented at one of the Seth conferences out here. Laura. She was interviewed by Laurel and out here. Anyway, so Mary did present at one of the California Seth conferences. I lost my train of thought. Could you, going back to Seth's Research Project website, could you referred to the Village Voice interview for those people who aren't familiar with the website? Could you tell us a little bit about the Village Voice interview? It was with both Jane and Rob. Is that correct? That's
correct. The reporter, I don't offhand remember his name. This is all all these detaily things are all new for me. And so I'm trying to make all these connections of who's who. So I don't recall his name offhand, but Mary got a hold of him, and he said he still had the original recordings from the interview. And it was almost like 3 days worth of recording that he did. And so he agreed to allow her to transcribe that and then put them up for sale on her website. And he owns the copyright to them. And so, and they're terrific. I mean, you really get to know Jane's personality and Rob's. Rob was very soft-spoken. Half the time you couldn't understand what he was saying because he was so quiet. And Jane was just feisty and funny and just a really amazing person. Her speaking voice is so different than the books, the way the books are written. It's like two totally different personalities. Just very loose and lively, kicking the pants. So those are available on Seth Research Project, as well as the little book for Leonard. And there's also a DVD that Bob Terrio, I don't know how Mary got to know who he is, but it's Seth's overview of the Seth Material. So it was interviewing Jane and Rob, and Seth talks about the Seth Material on this DVD, and that's been around for a while. You can order that on the website.
Right, and any proceeds would go towards funding more research on the life of Jane Roberts and the Jane Roberts papers at Yale University. Is that correct? Or
right.
to the project that you're researching, which is, so just talk a little bit about, if you could, what one thing that Mary, a lot of people present at, their Seth, Rick Stackster Newware in this network will do Seth conferences and workshops and focus on, Seth. But one thing Mary's presentation at the California Seth conference was notable because she spoke a lot about, Jane Roberts as a person. Jane Roberts was a poet. She was an author, and she would go into trance and, channel Seth. But, she also had her own personality. And that was one thing I thought that was unique or interesting about Mary's presentation at the Seth conference was she spoke about who Jane Roberts was as a person, as opposed to just, the channeler of the medium that channeled Seth.
Yeah. And I've always been very much interested in Jane. When I read the first Seth book, I just wanted to know, who's Jane? Who is she? What's she about? And so I've spent just as much time learning about Jane as I have reading the Seth materials, I think. And I think that's something also I had in common with Mary. And so I never actually met Mary or Richie. When I first worked on this little book to Leonard, I decided I wanted to go out there and see the Yale Library and meet Mary and Richie and see the Seth house, And so I planned this whole trip. I had everything all planned, hotel reservations and everything. And then COVID shut the States down. Nobody was letting people in without being quarantined for 2 weeks. So I had to cancel that. That was in the spring, a year ago this spring. So I rescheduled everything for October. Then, of course, Richie had passed by that point. And I was coming out to see Mary in October. And we were talking on the phone one day about this trip. And she says, Rich and I were talking about you. And she said, we were wondering what happens to the Seth Research Project if something were to suddenly happen to me. This is Mary talking. And she said, we thought of asking you if you would be willing to take over and make sure this all gets into Yale. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I'd be thrilled. It would be an honor for me. And she wanted to make sure that I got everything in the right medium for Yale to accept it and follow through with it and everything. And she never really did tell me what she wanted me to do at that point, because I was going to be out there a year ago, October, and I was going to spend 5 days in New Haven. We were going to drive up to Saratoga Springs so she could show me around, which is where Jane grew up, went to school. And then they shut the border down in Connecticut again. And so and this was like 5 days before I was supposed to get in the car and drive out there. So at least it wasn't after I left the house. That would have been upsetting even more, I think, if I'd gotten there or halfway there and found out I had to turn around. And then that's when she went in the hospital. And so she never really did have a chance to tell me everything that was the scope of this project. I was just blown away when I started receiving large cases of materials, cassettes and CDs and DVDs and papers and books. And I got a painting of Jane's out of it and books and all the data that was up on the internet. I had no idea how much it was. It's like 107 gigabytes.
Wow.
Of
That's
information
amazing.
that she put together.
Deb, we're running out of time. This is going to be another two-parter. Deb, we would love to have you back. Thank you for joining us on My Psychic Manifesto. Deb is going to come back on the next episode, and we'd love to hear more about what materials Mary left you to work with. There is an 8mm Kodachrome version. There's not much of Jane. There's a lot of audio, but there's not much video of Jane in trance as Seth. And there's one, if you go to Seth-researchproject.com, the website, you can view, there is video of Jane in trance as Seth in a class session. So Deb, thank you for joining us. Thank you for, we're going to welcome Deb back on the next episode of My Psychic Manifesto. And as always, the experiment continues. See you next time.
All right. Thanks. See you soon.
Thank you.
Whisper in the darkness as the December sun goes down. Breeze blowing around your feet as you stumble from the ground. The secrets in the moving dust. Know why your heart still beats. The stairs leading from the house onto the sacred